defenses. The move comes as the hacked and shut down Colonial pipeline comes back online. The president is expected to speak this morning about the nearly week-long cybersecurity incident. Joining us now, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Secretary, I looked at some of the states and the number of gas stations out of gas. I think if I were Transportation Secretary, I think I might have just left this week and just said, we got hacked by some Russian dark side, and you didn't tell me this could be part of the job. You going to hang in there?
Some days you know exactly what to expect at work, and then a lot of days something happens that makes you realize you're really going to be earning your paycheck that day. And I'll tell you, the whole of government approach from the beginning, when the president directed every department, including mine, to do everything we could to respond to this incident has really paid off. But obviously, we still have a lot of issues persisting during that interim period while we get the pipeline back up and running. And so our effort has been to look at every mode of transportation, see what we can do on the surface side, see what we can do on the maritime side, take every mode that we can and make it part of the solution.
And it's not even a supply issue, really, is it? It's the SPR type stuff. I mean, it's distribution. Can you mobilize some trucks? I mean, what is going on behind the scenes just to try to alleviate the near-term issues down in some of the states where, seriously, there are some bad lines and some bad things going on?
Yeah, to some extent you can. So part of what we've been doing is creating the flexibility and supporting states in creating the flexibility to allow more to happen with trucks. I'll give you an example. It turns out the physical capacity of a tank truck, if you fill it up all the way, actually puts it over the weight limits that you would ordinarily have, for good reason, on federal highways and on our roads. So temporary waivers of those weight limits are allowing more volume to be carried in tank trucks. And a lot of states have availed themselves of that flexibility ever since we were able to make a determination that that was legal because of some existing disaster declarations. You can do things with hours of service regulations that can be waived for similar reasons, just to get more of that product moving. Meanwhile, with our Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, we were able to provide some flexibility in terms of the qualification of the inspectors and people who could be workers who could be out making sure that the manual restarts are happening, getting the pipeline going. There are a lot of things that you can do, a lot of tools in the toolkit. But of course, the bottom line is we need this pipeline back up and running, and really welcomed the announcement and the news that was happening beginning early evening yesterday.
I don't expect you to solve all of our cyber crime vulnerabilities as Transportation Secretary, but that is an issue here. It's not just not just pipelines, it's everything. And I'm sure you could have some input, but have we not been vigilant enough overall with the possibility of ransomware and cyber attacks across the board to our economy? And what do we need to do?
I think for many Americans, this has been a wake-up call on how actors anywhere in the world could impact us right here at home. And when you look at our policy framework, our laws, a lot of them were not written for the cyber era. It's one of the reasons the president's executive order is coming at a very important time, and part of a bigger picture where we really need to make sure that we are harder targets for these kinds of cyber actions. The other thing I think it's reminding us of is the fact that in the United States, a lot of our critical infrastructure, either by private actors, right? This is a good example. This was a cyber attack on a private company operating and owning this pipeline, or it's municipal or other local government units, right? The federal government does not actually own and operate all or even most of our critical infrastructure in this country. And what that means is we're only as strong as our weakest link. So we've got to make sure every private sector player, every city or town that's running a water utility, certainly anybody who's involved in anything from the national airspace to ports when it comes to the transportation piece that I work with, everybody has to be as strong as possible and a step ahead rather than playing catch up.
You ever hear the expression, all politics are local, Mr. Secretary? So you're the Transportation Secretary now. So we're proposing a usage for the term infrastructure that Republicans would say includes every wish list from the Democratic Party going back 50 years. As a transportation secretary, do you now, and be honest with me, do you now just wish that we'd look directly at what your domain is? Roads, bridges, airports, throw in, some internet and Wi-Fi. Let's do $700-800 billion, do it with Republicans, get it done, give me my infrastructure, transportation money, and do not try to do everything at once. Tell me that you believe that, but I know you won't.
I mean, look, as the org chart goes, I'm the roads and bridges guy, right? The transportation part is the piece that I work on. But when I think about why roads and bridges matter, the fundamental reason they matter is they make it possible for Americans to live lives of their choosing, right? Whether there's a good road to get you where you're going is going to help determine whether you can go to school, whether you can go to work, whether you can see your family. And I think the same thing is also true of the other forms, the broader forms of infrastructure we're talking about. They're all part of the foundation that make it possible for us to live well. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in a semantic or philosophical argument over what to call something if it's a good policy, right? I mean, you're describing these as democratic items, but these are things the American people want. No,
Mr. Secretary, you might as well just tell me, you need those roads to drive to free college and free child care, and therefore I want to build them so that, I mean, come on. Come on.
Well, no, I think all this fits together because, look, you can either organize your thinking around the org chart of the federal government, or you can organize it around what the lives of human beings in this country are actually like.
Then you can make that jump to everything under the sun is infrastructure. We should spend $100 trillion and give everything to everyone because that's what their life is. You can't do, we don't have the money. We don't have the wherewithal.
We do have the money, though. That's the thing. Like, we abundantly do have the money because the bill is paid for, right? And the real question is, can we afford not to do this? Now, look, we're going to negotiate the scope, right? Obviously, there are differences of opinion. We're having good conversations across the aisle that are continuing today over the parts we can agree on and maybe other parts that are going to be tougher to get bipartisan agreement on. That's a natural part of the give and take. But I think the most important thing is that we not be focusing on the shape of the org chart of the different departments or the shape of the categories on somebody's concept of what infrastructure is. I think we should be concentrating on how we deliver good policies that meet the moment, that make life better. And I think the fact that we have helps to explain why the jobs plan has been so popular, not just as a whole, but in its individual pieces, because the American people want this. I mean, this is just a Democrat set of things that we care about. These are things the American people want us to do, expect us to do, and now it's our turn to deliver.
Secretary Buttigieg, if we could go back to the Colonial pipeline again, I mean, this is something that corporate America is watching so closely. These ransomware attacks have been things that have been pretty secretive in the past. We had Senator Warner on yesterday, and he's trying to make sure that these things get reported and that there is transparency in dealing with them. It has been reported that Colonial has not and will not pay the ransom. Do you know if that's true?
I can't speak to those details, but again, this is a reminder that the choices of private actors are critically important here. Now, there's been tremendous communication, not just with our pipeline administration within the Department of Transportation, but with the White House and the administration as a whole, with Colonial, to make sure we support them and help them get up and running. But I think, right now we're getting through the moment. We're making sure the gas gets to where it needs to be. We're making sure they get back to normal. But in the after-action report, we're going to have to be asking ourselves questions about what we can do, not just to respond, but to prevent.
Secretary, I mean, this is not a transportation-specific issue, but you did talk about some of the popularity of the programs. Do you think at this point that week jobs number on Friday, is it multifaceted what happened there, or do you think that maybe we've made it too easy to not go back to work at this point, for certain, which makes it very difficult for businesses to rebound, because they literally, we have people tell us again and again and again, they can't get workers in, even offering $18 an hour for some of these jobs. Do you think that that's an example of overreach that we need to be careful of? And we don't want to, we may have the money, but we want to be frugal when we spend it.
Well, of course, we want to be smart, we want to be balanced, but I also want to remind everybody, we are millions of jobs short still of where we were before this pandemic hit. Right, so it's not as if we're just sort of done. We can wash our hands, say, okay, no problem. We've got a lot of work to do, a steep climb to fully bring this economy back. There are a lot of things that are overlapping that seem to be impacting the availability of labor. Remember, a lot of folks don't have their shots yet, haven't been fully vaccinated. There are a lot of issues with just being able to deal with schools not yet being open and a lot of other things impacting people's ability to return to the workforce. And when we see any given month, I think certainly for the rest of this year, when we see numbers come in that are different from expectations, we should remember that we're coming off perhaps the most colossal economic shock of our lifetimes. And there are going to be a lot of dramatic dynamics going on that shape where we are. But what we know is that if we do this kind of work, not just in the short term, but when we're talking about the jobs plan, if we do the kind of work that makes the American economy more resilient and makes American families stronger and better off, that's going to prepare us for whatever shocks history may throw our way in the years and decades to come. And I want to emphasize, in addition to the work that we've done to try to make sure the economy in the moment is doing well and doing better, that has led to things like the incredible increase in job growth in this administration compared to what was waiting for us when we arrived. On top of all of that, we've got to have a long-term vision.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to. And I know how you feel about these things, but I'm just wondering is there the slightest bit of irony that you're going to be so concerned with making sure that pipelines that transport fossil fuels are up, ready, viable, and transporting those climate killers, the climate-killing fossil fuel around the country. You're going to have to do this for years, at least for your term. As long as you're transportation secretary, would you concede that you're going to need to have these pipelines running, a viable oil and gas industry, to keep prices low for the economy and to do all the things we do in terms of the economy and transportation? We need fossil fuels. So we can't transition tomorrow as much as you'd like to.
Of course we can't transition tomorrow. None of this happens overnight. And look, with our Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, our department's overseeing over 2 million miles of pipeline in this country that we need to be safe, operational, effective, and we got to do two things at once. We got to manage what we have, the cars, the pipelines, the systems that we have today, and we also have to recognize that the solution for the American people is not to pickle what we have and just make sure it stays the same forever, but to prepare for a future that is going to bring a lot of change and where we can either be ahead of that change or we can be playing catch-up. Unfortunately, our country has increasingly been playing catch-up, but we're ready for America to lead, and that's where the president wants us to be.
Secretary Buttigieg, the markets have turned positive. They were starting to. They were coming back from big negatives. They're now actually in the green, and I think it's the soothing, dulcet tone of your voice. And you don't cover it. See, you're covering everything, not just transportation. Now you could be a Treasury Secretary, theoretically. I mean, with the way this happened. I know you don't want to take Secretary Yellen's job.
I wouldn't dare. We have a fantastic Treasury Secretary.
Okay.
I'm gonna stay in my lane.
Well, I just know what I see, and uh-oh. See, we're going to say goodbye, and now the Dow's down again. Anyway, Secretary Buttigieg, just kidding. Thank you. Thanks for being here today, this morning, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.
Coming up.